Hello, and welcome to another virtual presentation of Concerts from the Library of Congress. Today I have the great pleasure, along with my colleague Kazim Abdullah, to speak with pianist Marwan Ben Abdallah. Before we get started, I want to thank Marwan in particular for his enduring patience and adaptability. What was to have been his live performance at the library was actually the first casualty of the library's closure due to the pandemic. It has taken over a year, but we are so pleased to finally be presenting this beautiful and exciting music. We would also like to thank the Embassy of Morocco for their support of Marwan's performance. Before we delve into the particular pieces of the program, I'm wondering, Marwan, if you could start out by telling us a bit about your Arabesque music project and how this particular program fits in with your overall goals for that project.
Well, first of all, David and Kazim, as I heard, thank you very much for having me. And I'm really delighted to have this conversation with you about the program, about Arabesque in general. 6 years ago, I'm sorry, almost 7 years ago, out of curiosity, I started researching composers from the Arab world. Well, out of curiosity is not the only inspiration. I was a little bit pushed by some presenters asking me, why don't you play something from Morocco, from the region? And I have to say, at that time, I didn't know many composers. I knew about 3, 4 from Morocco, Egypt. And I asked around my friends who might have known better or more composers, and they always said, no, there is no composer, there is me, blah, blah, blah. And so I had this idea of, well, probably there are no composers. And one day I accidentally bumped into a composer. I read about his biography, about his life, and then I found other composer. And today, after almost 7 years, I'm over 100 composers, 108, from different countries of the region. And it's been a quite exciting journey. Whenever I find a new composer, you hear his music, you become obsessed, and I had some sleepless nights when I was so excited about discovering a new gem, a new talent. So well, it's very different from the regular repertoire, and I have to point out that that's my main well, I started there. I started with every normal concert pianist, and this is a parallel road, let's say.
I remember when I first met you, you were playing at the Phillips Collection, and you played I think you were playing Prokofiev and Scriabin and other things like that.
Bartók and
yeah.
Flügelmann, Maximo Flügelmann. Yeah, he's the one who put us in touch, actually.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, and I remember I invited you, and you came, and I think there was something misunderstanding. Your ticket was not at the entrance or something. No, I think it was full, and they didn't let you in, and I had to do something, and then you came in.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. Well, all these years later, we finally get to hear you in our series, so we're so delighted. I'm gonna kind of alternate with Kazim, and we'll have some different questions for you. But maybe do you want to start off by speaking about Dia Sukari and the Dia Sukari?
Yeah, Dia Sukari.
Yeah.
Well, it's very interesting. He lived in a town near Paris where my parents live, my mom and her husband, and in Suresnes. It's in the west of Paris, just across the Bois de Boulogne. And he was the teacher of my brother at the Conservatoire of Suresnes. But at that time, I had absolutely no interest in Middle Eastern, North African music. So my stepfather bought some scores, which were for basic pianists, beginners. And it didn't really draw my interest. And it's only, I don't know, 15 years later, 20 years later, 15 years later, then I realized, he was from Suresnes. He was the teacher of my brother. And many years ago, I just, I said no to the music, and now I'm interested. But, it was a great reconnection. He, how shall I say, he's perhaps among all these composers one of the classics. He uses very Frenchy harmonies. I mean, it gives you the impression of hearing Ravel or Fauré with an Orientalist touch. But he also brings very typical rhythms from the Middle East. And I think this blend makes a very balanced result, where you find everything, and in the same time, and it's very natural. So you are not bothered by some strange harmonies or whatever. So it's one of the most easiest, I would say, for the public to listen to. He composed all kinds of music for piano, for chamber music. He composed many pieces for exams, conservatory exams in France. And so those pieces I received from my stepfather were some of those very basic pieces. I didn't pay much attention. But unfortunately, my interest in this music started a little too late after he died. So I was not able to meet him and talk to him, have his personal impression, insights on his own music. So fortunately, there is his widow, who is she takes care of his legacy, and well, he even has an unpublished violin concerto, and I promised her we will premiere it soon. Well, soon. It was I don't know, 3-4 years ago, but I hope it will happen soon.
One thing I like very much about the program is that you have this wide range of composers from throughout the region, but in particular, there are three kind of composers that are fairly young, like, 2 born in the 70s and 1 born in the 80s. And I'm curious, like you were, how did you come to sort of discover each composer? And like whether it's like someone like Salim Dada or Zazan Mutaka or Mohammed Fayrouz. And as you were performing these pieces, or as you've been performing these pieces, have you had contact with these composers, and how has that contact shaped your interpretation of the pieces that you've chosen for the program?
Good question, and I will try to answer it. Yeah, well, today I think I couldn't have done this project 20 years ago, because internet was very, very helpful to find composers, to read about them, find programs, some musical excerpts, but mostly read biographies, etc. So sometimes they have websites, you write to them and they answer. Sometimes they don't answer. Sometimes you have to find their heirs, their son or daughter, because they died many years ago. And I have to say, most of the time they are very helpful. They are very willing, and they send the music. But when I discover a composer, I want to read all his music. I want to have everything, so I can play this, read through this, and then choose what I want. But it's very hard sometimes to deal with them, because they'll send you only the pieces they are satisfied with. Sometimes they are 30 minutes sonatas, and at this point, I'm not sure I want to dedicate a whole second part of the concert to their sonata. At this point, I'm mostly presenting programs like a Kaleidoscope, like menu dégustation, or this amuse-bouche you have before a meal, small. How should I say?
Like having 4 short meals. So
yeah,
like a 4-course menu where you just get a sort of a taste and an essence of each composer.
Exactly. So I try to have a balance between the countries also, because I found out most of the composers coming from Egypt and Lebanon. These are the 2 most fertile countries. And there are some very good, so it's very hard to find a balance, to not put too many Lebanese composers or Syrian or Egyptians. So there is this part of devising a program, and then to go back to your question, sometimes it's been easy with composers, sometimes less. You have to deal with some excessive egos sometimes. They don't want to be featured in the same program as with others. If it's them, okay, you play all standard repertoire and their music, but not others. So,
Wow.
It's not easy. It's not easy. And especially finding their music. Some are published. That's the easiest. But for example, Dia Sukkari has some unpublished music. So I was very lucky to meet his widow, and she gave me the score of some pieces that you cannot find anywhere. And sometimes with some research, you find some names. There is one Abdelhak Al-Masri from Lebanon, who is completely forgotten. He lived in Paris. He died at a quite early age, but in 2007. And I found a pupil of his by coincidence on Facebook, and through him I found yes. So I found his pupil, and then he was very kind, and he had his parents go to their countryside home to find the music, to scan it for me and send it to me. Otherwise, I couldn't have. And it's beautiful music. I mean, hopefully, maybe in the next concert, I will play some pieces of his, because it's truly beautiful. And there are many forgotten composers. There is one, Anis Fuleyhan, who was born in 1900 and died in 1970. He was born in Cyprus from Lebanese parents. He then moved to Beirut. He lived in Tunisia also, and he second part of his life he spent in the US, and he was quite well known in the US at his time. He was published by Southern Publishing Music Company that was bought by Peer Music today, and he was the publisher of many Mozart and Wagner operas for American publishers, and he had his music premiered by the New York Philharmonic and Stokowski, playing his piano concerto, his symphony. And today, he's completely forgotten. So, and this brings me so much excitement when I'm able to present such composers to the public. And he was, this Anis Fuleyhan, he was quite prolific. He composed 14 or maybe 15 piano sonatas. I think that there are even some in the Library of Congress, and I was waiting. Actually, I was very much looking forward to my concert last year so I could have a look at them, because they are not published. But, well, let's hope in a...
Next time, let's definitely talk about that for sure.
We can do that. And he composed 2 piano concertos. He composed a concerto for theremin, this electronic instrument that gives a very strange sound, and it's beautiful. So you have these completely forgotten composers, and it brings me excitement, joy, and pride to play their music, to present something new to the audience. Because here is also the problem, and when you look at the program in different concert halls, and I have to point out, not because I'm talking to you, but because this is why I turned to the Library of Congress to present this program. Library of Congress has a very varied programs, and with many seldom performed pieces, true rarities. But when you look at the programs in other concert halls series, it's always the same performers and always the same composers. So we are circling around the same pot, and it's regrettable, because I think there are many other composers, seldom performed pieces. Let's say by Rachmaninoff, you had Stephen Osborne, who played the first sonata, which I also play and I love. But when you look at the programs in different concert halls, it's also always the second sonata that is performed. So I think we have to find a way to broaden the repertoire, to bring something new to the public. So I think Arabesque is in this frame quite interesting, I believe.
If I could just throw on something here, I think that what you're doing is just fantastic, because this is one of the things that I love the most, is getting a chance to hear music by composers I don't know, or just music in general that I haven't heard before. But I'm especially fond, I love new music as well, but I'm especially fond of music that exists but just has been forgotten. And I have zero, by definition, I have zero data to back this up. But I suspect that there are so many wonderful works out there that have just not been played in 100 years or 50 years or whatever, that we're just missing out on so much. So I really appreciate, just from on a personal level, the work that you're doing, and your advocacy for these composers and the music. And maybe just to draw back to some of the specific pieces that you're performing on this concert, I would love to hear a few more things about what drew you, for instance, to the Algerian miniatures of Dada.
Well, yes, Kazim, you asked me about the relationship with the composers. Well, Algerian miniatures is a very good example. I used to play number 2 and number 3 from this set of 5 pieces, and well, I just played it. I learned it and played it. And before this concert, the composer wrote me that he would like me, because it's recorded and it will stay online for quite some time, he asked me, let's have a session together to work on the pieces. And I said, well, okay, let's do it. And it was so eye-opening to me, because, well, there is something written on the score, and there is something that he has in his mind which is not written in the score. And so I realized how much the relationship with the composer, the direct relationship, is important, and it's important to consult with them about their piece. So my interpretation of these 2 Algerian miniatures are new for this recording. I used to play them in a way before, and now it's different. So this is how the relationship with the composer is important. And I'm sorry, you asked something, David. I just forgot.
Well, no, just about that. I mean, it's interesting that this is a different pair, because this particular pair is quite compelling, because it's like a declamatory style first one, followed by the dance, the second one, and so it makes a great contrast to get like a sense of this composer.
Yeah,
it's a wonderful juxtaposition.
I played the number 3, which has a more connection to Morocco, because it uses an Andalusian theme that we sing in Morocco. It's a very popular song. But then I realized this first is a better introduction to the second, and that is why the second, for example, the dance starts I mean, ends with a suspended harmony. He doesn't finish on a D, because the next piece starts on a D major chord. That is the release of the previous tension, which I didn't realize, I have to say, until I talked to the composer about this specific ending. So there are many things that we discover and that are not written in the music. So yes, this first piece is, as you said, a declamatory piece. It is a song from North Algeria that women, mostly women, used to sing for joyous and sad occasions. Sometimes when their husband, their son, is in exile, he travels somewhere very far, so they sing these songs, these laments, to evoke their loved ones. And he starts this piece with unisono, and then when the theme comes for the second time, he brings in harmonies, absolutely European, Western classical harmonies, and well, I mean, it gives them a very special flavor. I mean, in this case, the harmony gives a special flavor to the melody. Sometimes it's the melody that gives a special flavor to the harmony. Maybe in the case of Dia Sukari, I could say that the melody has this Oriental touch with European harmonies again, but it's in the same. It's in the same. I'm sorry, in the opposite direction.
It's funny because I had actually, one of the things I'd written down was about this unexpected ending at the end of the dance. So I'm glad that you said that, because I was kind of curious about that.
I will tell you, in Bach's music, very often it ends. I mean, it's written in minor, and he ends it with a major chord. Let's say it's all written in G minor with all the harmonic development, but it ends on a G major chord. So I used to play it with an ending on D major. I was feeling the need of that D major, and he wrote me in a quite dry manner, please don't play D major at the end. I said, okay. and then I got the explanation why he doesn't want the D major at the end, because the next piece starts on a D major chord. So many things to learn.
Absolutely. Well, maybe we can move on, because there's some of my favorite. I mean, I really enjoy the entire program, but the Multaka pieces are, I think, just super exciting, and I like the opening bass accompaniment, like percussive bass accompaniment, and the way that is used throughout the entire variation set. Maybe you could just say a bit about these pieces, and if you have a relationship with that composer as well.
Yeah, well, and I only played two. There are three pieces in total, but if I had played the third, that would have made a major block, Multaka block in the program, and I wanted to keep a certain balance, as I said. Multaka was a fantastic pianist, and that is the reason why his music is so elaborate from a pianistic point of view. He uses all the tools, all the possibilities of the piano, all the pedals, all three pedals, and it brings out so interesting, so unique effects in the piano. He plays with the overtones. He is able to write harmonies that give you the impression you are playing a quarter tone, and yet you are not playing only half tones, let's say. So it's very elaborate music, and from a pianistic point of view, it's challenging, but it's also rewarding.
It struck me as almost effortless, that like the penultimate variation where is the muting and things like that. That it just, the variation, that it held through so well, and then of course with the echo, the fantastic echo variation at the end. But go ahead, Kazim. I was just going to say that it just struck me as a I'm glad to hear that he's a pianist, because that comes through in the writing and the way in your performance.
Well, no, yeah, I was just gonna just follow up um, on what was just said. I was just simply going to say what's kind of really neat about Wotaka is that he really brings these 20th century composing techniques along with the, like, what I guess you could call Oriental rhythmic traditions, and he really sort of brings the two together. And it was kind of, for me, striking. Yeah, like, there of course are no quarter tones on the piano, but he somehow is able to manipulate somehow with his writing that kind of aura and sound.
Well, let me tell you, Zad Multaqa stopped his pianistic career because he wanted to dedicate his life to composing, and he's also a painter. But he was bothered by a certain contradiction, between Western and Oriental musical traditions. How can we mix them? How can we blend them in an organic way? Not like Orientalism of the 19th century, where you just put a melody like Saint-Saëns did, or Félicien David, or many others.
Sure.
So he wanted to find a way to create something right in the middle of these two poles, and he did a lot of experiences, and then he composed this cycle Zarani for singer, piano. It's usually these muashahs, these songs are performed by a singer, oud, it's lute, and percussion. And he brought the piano like a counterpoint, like a counter instrument to bother that Oriental sounds, those quarter tones that both the singer and the oud can produce, not the piano. So he had to create something where everything is harmonic in a way, organic, and he succeeded. He succeeded, and these pieces I'm playing are performed between songs, so the singer can have a rest, and the pianist can show his his whatever abilities on the keyboard. Well, the other pieces as well are challenging as well. But these pieces are. I don't want to repeat myself, but he's using traditional melodies. And the first piece I'm playing, yes, is a set of variations. So you have Western musical structure meeting an Oriental melody, recent Oriental melody from the 60s, 70s, I believe. So he builds a beautiful set of variations, and again, I can only say it's fascinating that how he managed to compose something of such how should I say sophistication.
Well, absolutely. It's a stunning pair of pieces. I'm really excited that you chose those. Maybe should we look at the Fayrouz? Maybe you could say a few things. Or Kazim, did you have another question?
No, I didn't have another question. I was also going to suggest, like if you had just any perspectives that you would like to share about the Fayrouz work.
Well, Mohammed Fayrouz, I don't know actually how I came across his name. Well, he's perhaps among all these composers the most famous because he lives in New York. He's well introduced in the concert life, concert circles. His music is performed by leading orchestras and soloists. He's published by Pure Music, and he has his music also released on Deutsche Grammophon. So it brings him quite some renommee. I found this music because, of course, arabesque is about building bridges, opening a window on the Arab world. And I really like, for example, the idea of Dia Sukkari finding inspiration in a Muslim, in an event that is so important in the Muslim calendar. You don't find that. You have Christmas inspiring, Easter inspiring, other events, and Dia Sukkari was inspired by this Night of Destiny, and in the same on the same level, you have Muhammad Fayrouz, who is a Muslim, and he finds inspiration in a prayer, in a text by Yehuda Amichai, which is also a prayer for the part of the Jewish funeral service. And I think this dialogue between cultures is very important. This is what will make us move forward and unite us, and whatever. I mean, you name it. There are so many things we need to do to stop this division, and I don't know if it will ever stop, but we have to do our best. So it's in this spirit that Muhammad Fayrouz composed this Al-Mal Rachamim. Something I didn't tell in the video. It starts with this chords in the lower register. The middle part of the first movement sounds like Bartók's Piano Sonata, the second movement. And I asked him, is it from Bartók? He said, no, absolutely not. He didn't even know much that piece. So, well, I believed him, but I thought there is a connection because Ligeti was Hungarian. Maybe Bartók was also a source of inspiration. Who knows? I'm just telling what I found and what is striking when you hear the piece. So there is this connection, and well, I mean, he has Muhammad Fayrouz has also a very American way of composing. His harmonies are very, similar to other American composers, and he brings Oriental touch. That's it.
You definitely get some glass in the Moto Perpetuo movement, for instance.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. A bit more than Glass, because I played many pieces by Philip Glass, but he doesn't go further in his harmonic exploration.
I don't mean to be reductionist, but it's just like there's moments where it blossoms into this sort of Americana sort of harmonic world of the that's
exactly. It has some feeling of a movie, film music sometimes, especially in the second movement.
And then you have a Moroccan composer, Nabil Ben Abdel Jalil. And this, one of the things that I was pleased that you chose this piece, because it's a nocturne, and I think you mentioned this as first piece. But one of the I think some people have the opinion that you cannot have a piece that's in a style of some older style and take it seriously in a way. But to me, that's kind of an insane sort of way of looking at it, or it's not a productive way of looking at music, because when we hear a piece for the first time, whether or not it has, what I'm referring to is it's sort of Chopinesque, nocturne-like characteristics. But I mean, this is the same thing with Scriabin. He wrote a lot of preludes and nocturnes and things that are, from before his time, but there's still things that I like to listen to. And this is another one of those pieces where it's a beautiful piece, beautifully played, and it kind of represents a composer at the beginning of their journey. So I'm curious what else, or what you like to say about him.
Well, I think every composer, when at the beginning, starts by imitating others. So you mentioned, sorry, who did you mention?
Like Scriabin with
Scriabin, yeah, sorry. Yeah, you have Bartók, for example. his pieces from his youth when he was 17, 18, 20, the 4 piano pieces, including the scherzo, including etude for the left hand. Well, it's very Brahmsian in its way of composing, of sounding, making the piano sound. So obviously all composers start by imitating and then they find their own way. And Nabil was not happy I played this piece. He said, well, you know, I composed other pieces as well, so it would be nice if you stop playing this piece. I said, look, I start with this piece and then I move to another when I play for the second, third time. Because, of course, this is, you know, it goes back to the 90s, early 90s. Today, I mean, since then, he has composed many pieces for piano, several elaborate pieces, pianistically speaking, and in terms of style, I mean, it's very different. I choose to play this nocturne because, you know, it's simple, but in the same time, it's genuine, it's unpretentious. So I said, well, you know, it's and I like sincerity, so so that's the only reason I played it.
Well, that's fair enough.
I'm glad. Let me add something. This is a piece I played many times, okay? And so I could say this is his most popular piece. And many people write me asking for the score because they want to learn it. So, you know, I told him, you know, maybe you're not happy that I'm playing it, but many people want to learn it. So
yeah, that counts for something, right? I mean, it's an entryway into that composer's other work too, I would think. So that's another nice service of presenting it.
Yeah, exactly. His second nocturne comes 20 years later, very different style, and I premiered his latest work 3 years ago for his latest work for piano, and it's also a beautiful piece. And that's very Moroccan, you see, compared to this Chopinesque nocturne. That's, you know, the rhythm is Moroccan, the harmonies are very Moroccan. So yeah, the composers evolve, and there is one Lebanese composer who composed very long pieces, and he composed 5 pieces when he was young, and I asked him about those 5 pieces. Could you please send me that music? He said, oh, no, you know, my style has evolved since then, and I'm not proud of those works. And you know, I tried to convince him, but there's no way. So just to answer one of the previous questions,
you know, that's a common problem. It gets into that whole Brahmsian burning of his old pieces sort of a thing, and composers getting so caught up in you know, maintaining this sense of legacy. When I think it's much more interesting to see the variety and you know, diversity and quality potentially across their career, and just embracing that as opposed to having to be perfect or having to be, you know, to live up to this ideal that they've maybe set for themselves that the rest of us wouldn't mind just listening to the music.
Exactly.
Yes, and just sort of coming to sort of the last piece on the program. I mean, one question that I had for you about the Camille Saint-Saëns is, yeah, you know, you made this very beautiful reduction actually of this piece that I would have never known that the piece is actually for full orchestra and piano. And I'm curious, have you done a lot of arrangements yourself? Is that something that's new, or is that something you've done often yourself?
I've done few arrangements. In the frame of Arabesque, I've done a reduction of Bartók's second string quartet's second movement that was inspired from his North African trip in 1913. And he uses some North African elements. And it's a that was very challenging. And I genuinely like playing arrangements, doing arrangements, hearing something. I can play it on the piano, so it's not a big deal. When it's written music, in the case of Saint-Saëns, it was in 2008. There was this centenary of film music, and he was the very first composer to write a music specially for a movie. Because before that, you had a pianist, let's say, sitting below the screen and just improvising according to what's happening on the screen. But then you have Saint-Saëns, who composed music for this film called The Assassination of the Duke of Guise. And I had a concert, this movie concert, where I played this movie, accompanied this movie in the second part, and I had to play Saint-Saëns for the first part. And at that time, I knew etudes, of course, and I found a reduction, an arrangement of the second piano concerto by Bizet. And I played that first movement, and then I said, and I discovered Africa. I said, well, let's try to do something in the same spirit. And, Africa is very challenging for the solo piano. And adding the orchestra makes it even more challenging. But, it's a very entertaining piece. Let me add something that just 2 weeks before recording this concert, I discovered that Saint-Saëns made a reduction himself.
Oh, really? Okay.
I didn't know before that. Because there is only the score for orchestra and piano. There is a 2-piano reduction, of course, by the composer, but I didn't know there was a solo version. So it was very interesting to compare my view of the piece and what I brought from the orchestra to the piano and what he brought. There are parts, in full honesty, there are parts that I think he did better, of course, but there are other parts I think or maybe he didn't want. I made it harder to play, but I was able to actually bring the rhythm from the orchestra and also the piano part. So I can say with pride, that I'm proud about my achievement.
Is your version written down, or is it just one that you just play?
It's partly written down.
Partly written down.
It's partly written down. There are some parts that are obvious to play on the solo piano. There are other parts that are not that obvious. So I wrote them down. So whoever asked me to play, or whoever asked me for the score, I can send. But I have to write it down from the beginning to the end.
Yeah, really, I hope you do. I think it's a really great arrangement, and you play it so well. And I just have to make one little library plug here. One of our only major Saint-Saëns manuscripts that we hold. So the Africa dates from 1891, I think. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, actually. And then 1896 or so, you get the 5th concerto, the so-called Egyptian concerto. And we actually have the holograph manuscript of that at the library. I don't know if you knew that, but you should definitely come and check it out. It came to us actually via Isidore Philippe and somebody else. Who was it? Rudolf Gans. And then he gave it to the library in 1956. But Saint-Saëns gave it to Philippe in 1918 or so. And so it kind of made its circuitous way to us. And so it's one of our little gems of his that we have. And it just happens to be not being featured today, or in this performance, but at least is kind of in the same area. And I guess one last thing I'd love for you to speak about, unless Kazim has another question too, is that just this, maybe say, because this is coming from that element of exoticism in European imagination in the 19th century of Africa, in this case, Africa being just Northern Africa. But at least in Saint-Saëns' case, he actually visited and went, and actually it wasn't just all in his imagination. He actually went there. So I'd just be curious what you could say about any of those elements that you'd like to, or anything else that you really would like to put forward.
Yeah, well, Saint-Saëns was, I think he was a curious person by nature, because he traveled all over the world. He went all the way to Saigon, Vietnam today. He went to Sri Lanka. He went to North Africa quite often. It was his most favored place. And all of these travels, of course, inspired him. On the same level, you have Bartók, who was touring Spain with Ferenc Vécsey, violinist, and he, after a concert in Cadiz, he had some days off, and he decided to go to Morocco out of curiosity. So he went to Tangier, and that was in 1906, and he decided to come back. I believe he must have heard some music, some compelling music, and that was his first impression of North African Arabic music, they call, but I think it was more Berber music. And then it took him 7 years to gather all the authorizations to go to Algeria. He had also he struggled with some health issues, but he went to Algeria, and he went to a very small town in the middle of the country, Biskra. I mean, I still don't know why he went there. I believe maybe at that time it was some oasis people were fantasizing about, like we fantasize about Marrakesh today. I believe that's the only reason, because it's really a little town in the middle of nowhere. Why he went there, I don't know. Maybe he had someone he knew who suggested Biskra. So he went to collect folk music, traditional music, and after that he used this music in a very organic way. So if I don't tell you he went to North Africa, you wouldn't even find out through his second string quartet, or the dance suite, or the suite opus 14 for piano, or many second concerto, first concerto have very strong influence from North Africa. As a Moroccan, knowing those rhythms and those some tiny melodic patterns, I could recognize. And for many years, I was feeling, oh, this is so familiar. This is music. I mean, it must have some influence. Although at that time I didn't know he went to North Africa. It's only after that I discovered. So Bartók is one of these Orientalists without being Orientalist, because Saint-Saëns, Félicien David, and others were Orientalist in a blatant way. You see, I mean, they exposed this Orientalism. Bartók used it in a very discreet way. You wouldn't notice, but he built it in his own music. So we started somewhere. That Saint-Saëns traveled North Africa. I have another interesting interaction with an Arab composer who was complaining, why do you play Saint-Saëns? Because well, he was from Algeria, and Algeria has a not very shiny past with France. So for them, this Orientalism sounds like colonialism in music. As a Moroccan, I have no problem with that, and I have a different relationship to this. So I didn't find anything to object. I just find it very interesting that Saint-Saëns dared to use such Oriental elements in his music.
Well, Marwan, thank you so much for speaking with us about your program. It's so fascinating, and I hope that you keep documenting all of these different discoveries that you're making, and We're just really impressed with it, and thank you so much for doing it for us and for speaking with us today.
Yes,
Well,
thank you.
Of course, I'm keeping all these musics, and people will be able to hear me, hopefully. And I would like to thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, for this conversation, and for this online concert. It's a great honor to present for the first time in the US this program.
Well, it's also an honor for us, and we're all looking very much forward to hearing the concert. Yes, thank you once again for just really making such a fantastic program for us to present online.
Thank you.